All right, what's up? Going to be talking a little bit today about how I think the progression order in the game has changed, how I think the leveling order has changed because of this, and how I think that, overall the progression of the game has been altered over time, how the end game has changed, and how really the goals of the game has changed. So, for me personally, my thought behind progression is that progression is getting as much access to the game as possible, right? Being able to access and beat all of these levels in classic, being able to beat all these levels and challenges, and being able to get all the monsters in the game, right? Being able to buy all the upgrades, being able to evolve the monsters that can be evolved, to max out the monsters that can be maxed out. I think I don't really focus on the 3 gold aspect of as much, get everything at 3 gold stars. I just think getting your monsters and set up to a point where they can get access to most of the game or all of the game, right? That's progression for me, and that's what I play the game for personally. So that's how I'm going to be talk about this video. Yeah, I think in the earlier stages of the game, of course, it was just King, Rage Fist. Nightmare levels didn't exist. They both had their hard modes, very limited progression. You just beat these 2 levels and you're pretty much done with the game. You didn't really have access to much else. As time went on, Nightmare levels did come around. Hard levels did come around, and then you did have the IQT challenge, which did not give any rewards, and was purely sort of that end game type of challenge that you just did basically for fun, right? When you're at that stage of the game where you have pretty much everything, the nightmare levels and the IQT were there because they didn't provide you with more efficient farming, right? Efficient farming is very accessible, but they provided a challenge, and that challenge was there just for basically the sake of the challenge, for completing something in the game. You don't get anything in it, you just complete the level, right? And I think that really impacted how a lot of people viewed progression, getting units, because those levels were not necessary at all, right? Originally completing King Nightmare, not necessary. JR Nightmare, not necessary. IQT before it gives rewards, why really? It's not efficient, right? You get nothing from the challenge. Everything there is just there for fun, to do if you want to do a bit more in the game, right? But I think now, as as the games develop more, as more units have been incorporated, these levels that were originally for fun are now necessary for efficient progression, right? Of course, now in most of the challenges, right? Evil Summoner, you got your Power Stones. Master's Challenge, you got the useless Evo Stones, but they're more access in the game nonetheless. And then you got your 3 Elemental challenges. KPR Evolution Stones don't do anything yet, but they'll probably add Electric Evolutions in the future. And now IQT, Ice Evolutions are some of the best, right? Archimedes is probably the most important evolution in the game. Just because it greatly changes how you use that unit, and it greatly affects the efficiency of your farming, right? And now, especially with these weekly achievements for red gems, now you do need to beat the nightmare level so you can get these 200 or 300, 100 red gems from beating one level, right? That's what's going to be able to get you more mythics. That's going to give a higher chance for you to have access to mythics, and mythics are really the backbone of end game setups, right? They're way better to use for nightmare levels, way better to use for challenges. If you want to beat a elemental challenge, even in normal mode, it's practically necessary to have mythics, right? Mythics are a necessary part of the end game and getting access to them, and all of them are very important, right? And so I think all of these have really reshaped what progression means in the game. And I don't play coming from part of the game where this wasn't available. I'm a pretty recent player. I've been playing for a month now. I used to play back in 2019 for maybe a month or two. So I'm I'd say I'm pretty used to having all this stuff to do in the game, all these elemental challenges and all these stages of progression that the player has access to now. And I think that also has changed, especially a lot of the older guides on leveling, right? Specifically, if you do know, some older monster leveling guides or setup guides, original setups incorporating, Felina as your main carrier, not even Felina, right? If you wanted to maximum efficiency farm, you'd use a setup such as, what I'll do here. You play Joint Revenge normal, you get your Speedy in the front row, you get a nice leveled Clyde and Flamey, and that's gonna be, probably what I'd say the best setup, right? For the purpose of being able to farm the best, get you the most gold, gems, orbs. This was pretty much the best setup, I'd say. Maybe you add in something like a where is she? Maybe you add in something like a Felina, right? Maybe you add it in a damage buffer if they can't quite one-shot stuff. You know, you add in something like a Crispy, you know, maybe an Archimedes. But this is, you know, pretty much your best setup. You know, not this exact setup, but these units pretty much comprise the best setups in past stages of the game. And I think this has really changed now, because now there's more focus on unit damage, right? These elemental challenges in their later waves have such absurd amount of unit HP that now damage is a viable concern again, just flat damage, right? You know, before the setup to do JR Nightmare, sort of, I guess, you know, the quote-unquote, you know, strongest setup, it wasn't really the strongest because there's no reason to make a setup this strong, but you just run something like Felina plus you know, Hellhound plus Mighty, and then you get your permastallers up front, right? This was the kind of strongest setup, I guess, for completing levels, especially if your units were a bit lower leveled. But I think you know, this setup, really, there was not too much point in using it before. I use normally a Blitz Charger here, but don't have them, so, or sorry, Pony Sparks. But you know, this is pretty much your best setup in the past, right? In terms of just defeating a level. No reason to really have this, but now, you know, there is a reason to have these sort of setups, except you don't use these units anymore, right? You know, a standard Volcano Goddess setup would probably look something like, you know, get your Hellhound, you get your Horus, and you get your Jiraiya, right? This is really the more common Volcano Goddess setup now, and there's much more important focus on power. And so if you've seen the thumbnail of this video, you know, I am talking about like Amaterasu Hades over stuff like Felina, Hellhound, and you know, Blue Archangel. And I think that really shows how the meta has changed over time, because now, especially when you're focusing on defeating these nightmare levels that I previously talked about being very important to get these mythic gems, now it's about getting there as fast as possible, right? Maximizing your time, maximizing setup efficiency. And so now you focus a lot of your gold onto these mythics, right? Only 20 million gold rather than like a 40 million gold Felina, 40 million gold Hellhound. Now you just get these mythics probably around level 400, maybe even a little bit less if it's a really strong mythic like Jiraiya, Amaterasu, right? And now these mythics have really taken over, you know, that sort of late game and end game meta. Because now they're what you want to upgrade, right? They're the easiest way to get through the nightmare levels, right? Slime King won't work. Slime King doesn't do enough damage. Even something like a level 400 Hellhound won't be able to single-handedly carry you through these nightmare levels, and now you just want to focus on these mythic units instead, right? And I think that's, you know, mainly one of the biggest changes, just how much the game has come around to revolve around mythics, how much it has changed the levels you want to focus on. And I think the game is in, you know, much better state now, because now every level is worth doing, right? Maybe not every level is worth farming, right? King 1-5, JR Hard, JR Normal, these are the levels that you usually want to farm the most, except now there's at least a reason to do these nightmare levels other than they're a fun challenge after I've basically completed the game, right? Now, you know, they're incorporated into progression and you have a reason to do them. And I think overall that's just really good for the game. And that really provides more motivation to create a stronger setup, to not just leave off at that speedy Clyde Flamey or even something like a speedy Jiraiya, right? There's more content in the game. They've created more out of less, basically. I want to talk more about, you know, this more out of less topic later on. But yeah, I think overall that's just what I wanted to talk about today. Just, you know, how this level progression has changed over time, how what you upgrade has changed over time, how it sort of has went from those Clyde Flamey farming setups to now powerhouse setups, right? Setups, you now have incentive to build a setup that maximizes its damage in the end game, right? That original setup of Felina plus carries plus permastall, that was, you know, pretty much useless for efficient farming. That type of setup, the mindset behind that setup, now can be employed into the later levels and is really good for farming. To complete those levels, right? And that's pretty much all I want to talk about today. You know, like, subscribe, and yeah, see ya.